Hello, and welcome to Dialogo, an alumni podcast. In each episode, we interview an alum of a graduate program in the social sciences here at the University of Chicago, exploring both their career path and reflecting on their time at UChicago. I am Kelly Pollack, Dean of Students in the Division of the Social Sciences at the University of Chicago.
And I'm Paul Post, Deputy Dean in the Social Science Division at the University of Chicago.
And joining us today is our guest, Dr. Mauricio Moura, the founder and chief executive officer of IDEIA Big Data and a visiting scholar at George Washington University. Dr. Moura is an alum of our Master of Arts program in the social sciences, graduating in 2003, and he later went on to earn a master's degree in political management from George Washington University and a PhD in public sector economics from FGV. Welcome, Dr. Moura.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Kelly, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to talk to UChicago anytime.
Great. So we would love to hear a little bit about sort of starting backwards, what you are doing right now, the kind of work that you're pursuing, and then we'll start talking too about your time at UChicago.
Oh, right now I have basically three hats. One is like you said, I'm a chairman of the company that does market research and political polling with lots of technology behind it. Since 2 years ago, my second hat, I opened a fund that we trade based on election predictions. So I follow elections around the globe and try to predict the outcome, and then we trade on that. And I also part of the GSPM at the George Washington University, the Graduate School of Political Management. I'm like a researcher, and I'm also a member of the board of the department. So basically, that's what I'm doing right now.
Great. All right. So I'm going to have to ask right away, given the second of your hats, which is, did you predict accurately that Trump would win the 2024 election?
I did. Especially, I was not expecting him to win the popular vote, to be honest. But I was expecting that he was in a good position to win the swing states, especially because of the perception that people had about the Joe Biden administration. But having said that, was super close. So if you get the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, we're talking about 400,000 votes. So it was a super close race in the end.
So I would love to hear a little bit about how you ended up coming to the master's program in the social sciences at UChicago. What was sort of what brought you here and the kind of work that you did in the program?
Oh, actually, when I was 14 years old, I was an exchange student in the Chicago area. I went to a high school called IDEIA Central High School. So I had the chance to visit the University of Chicago at that time. So it was my first interaction with the U of C. And then when I graduated in college back in Brazil, I was seeing the programs that I could pursue to spend like a year and a half abroad. And what attracted me about the program itself was the idea that I could grab courses in different areas. So I ended up doing courses in economics, in social science, and public policy. So for me, it was the opportunity to go back to Chicago in a sense, but also to have a sense of a graduate school and with different options. So basically, that was my decision. To go to Chicago, I got a scholarship from the Rotary Club. So I had to do something related to economic development. And then I studied microfinance actually at my MA program. In the end, I did a paper on microfinance at that time. But the decision was the university itself, but also the option that I had to grab different courses in different areas.
That's great to hear. And it makes a lot of sense given that the MAPS program, which you're an alum of, is designed to allow students to be able to have an experience with all the various social sciences. Obviously there's certain tracks to it, but it's great to hear that was one of the things that made it attractive, was kind of the interdisciplinary nature of it. Do you recall, you mentioned a little bit, but do you recall exactly your thesis that you wrote at the time? Maybe even the title of it?
Yes, I did, of course, and it was a very important in my career as well. I did a study about a microfinance initiative in Brazil, in the northeast of Brazil, in a very poor area of Brazil. So I studied how they were lending, they were doing group lending, micro lending, and was my first time actually understanding microfinance in the very sense. I had the opportunity to go back to Brazil and go to those places. So I met a lot of people that were getting the loans, the micro loans, who were in a very poor area. So it was all about microfinance. So it was basically, the title was Understanding Microfinance in Brazil. The program itself had a name called Credit Amigo, and was on one of the biggest micro loans in Latin America. So it was really good, actually.
Paul always likes to ask about, the academic side, and I like to hear about the rest of your time in MAPS. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it was like living in Chicago, the things that you did while you were here, the friendships that you made.
No. Actually, like I said, I had experience to being in the Chicago area before, so it was kind of a familiar place for me, including the winter. That is very tough, especially when you come from Brazil to have to be a winter in Chicago. It's a kind of a tough experience. But I had a chance to do two things that were very important for me in parallel to the program. One was I played volleyball for the University of Chicago club, volleyball club. So it was really interesting, and I always played volleyball in my life. So it's kind of a way to have like an activity outside the academia, outside the regular schedule. But I also was in the summer in Chicago. I was part of a research outside the university. I was basically interviewing people that were Mexicans, immigrants in the Chicago area. So we did a work. I was basically collecting data to understand how they were sending money to Mexico. So I went to many neighborhoods and Latino neighborhoods in Chicago. So I was knocking on doors and getting the exercising to doing the interviews myself. So I was doing it in Spanish. So was kind of a very interesting to know the real Chicago, the real areas, the real neighborhoods. Of course, like I lived in the Hyde Park, so I know the south side of Chicago, but that experience to go and to understand the Latino and the Mexican, how they were living, how they were making money, how they were sending money to back to Mexico was really cool to do it.
And it's really fascinating that you were able to spend your time at UChicago, both academically and practically, studying kind of two aspects of the same phenomena, which is, as you said, your thesis was focused on microfinance, and then you were also doing this research related to remittances, people sending money back home and so forth. And did that type of like dual experience of studying as well, studying it in those two different ways, is that what set you up then for what you went into immediately after UChicago?
No, totally. And in two aspects. One is that the job that I got after I graduated in Chicago was basically I went back to Brazil to run an operation that was a combination of a local bank in Brazil and the IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank. They kind of they did a joint agreement to establish new operation of microfinance in Brazil. So I went back and I actually was doing microfinance. I established microfinance operations in very poor areas in São Paulo and Rio, like slums, very complicated areas from socially in terms of security. So it was actually a very real world experience that I had to make implementing a operation. One thing is to study microfinance. Another thing is to run an operation of microfinance. And so in that sense was kind of super correlated. I studied microfinance and I went to work for microfinance. But the experience that I had collecting data in the Mexican neighborhoods in Chicago was the first time that I actually run a survey myself. Of course, I was the one doing the interviews and I was like a piece of the machine. But it was my first time that I understood the dynamics and behind collecting data, behind running a survey. And it was very important, not only for my PhD thesis afterwards, because my PhD thesis was also a survey in a poor area, but also when I run the company, when I run the firm, was actually my first experience on the ground. So it was both experience that I had in Chicago were key factors of my career afterwards.
People who graduate from MAPS, of course, sometimes go on to do PhDs, sometimes go on to go into other types of jobs like in government or in business. You've sort of done all of those things. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your decision to go on then for further education after MAPS and how the MAPS degree set you up to be prepared for that kind of work.
No, absolutely. First of all, is an introduction to graduate school. So in that sense, it's good because it's very hard coming just after college to know if you want to pursue a PhD or not. It's too much, and so that have this kind of a middle ground and have like a first time experience in graduate school was very important for me. And the PhD happened in my life in an accidental way, and it's related to Chicago as well. When I was in Chicago, I met a PhD student in economics, actually a Brazilian that he was studying at the econ department. And then he went back to Brazil, became a professor in the school that I did my PhD. And one day we were discussing, and he said, "Oh, I need to find someone to be my first student that I'm going to advise as a professor." And then he became my advisor. So I actually met my PhD advisor in Chicago. And we had an opportunity to run a survey about the effect of land title in credit access, in supply of labor. And so it was a really cool like social experiment that we did. So I basically went to PhD knowing what I was about to research and knowing my advisor. So it was and it was tough on side because I was working and running the thesis. So it was not an easy time for me at all, and I don't recommend. I think looking backwards, it's very hard to work in a thesis and work in parallel. So, but it ended up that worked for me. But it was funny because I met my advisor he was a PhD student in Chicago as well.
All roads lead back to Chicago. This is great. This is wonderful. So at this point, you're wrapping up your PhD. And as you just said, you've had kind of this experience of you're both a student and working at the same time, but they're all related in many ways and they're building on each other, they're reinforcing skills and knowledge. So then what became the very next step for you once you completed your PhD?
Actually, I just a little bit about background. After I ran this microfinance operation in Brazil that was part owned by the IFC, and I was hired to come to work for the IFC in Washington. That's why I came to DC, and I have been in DC since 2008, so long time. But I came here to work for the IFC, so I was responsible to a different department there. It was an incredible experience working for the World Bank. I was basically covering Latin America, but I had the chance to work with people from all over the place with different backgrounds. By the time I came to DC, I was in the middle of my PhD thesis, so I kind of ended up writing from here. But during my PhD thesis, I started to attending some courses at the GW, the George Washington University. And it was funny because I was working at the bank doing my thesis. And at that time, it was during the Obama campaign in 2008. So basically in Washington, D.C., it's all about politics, as you guys know. So I was very curious to understand the operation, especially the data side behind the political campaign. And that was my first step to working in politics and understanding the dynamics. So I was basically doing my PhD writing, but also it helped me to engage in a place in a university that was basically breathing, and everyone was talking about politics and about, especially at that time, the Obama campaign.
There's so many directions that I could go just on what you just said there. As a political science professor, but also, there's a lot of ways we could go with this. This is so fascinating. So I think I'll start with just the one question, which is focusing on your time with the World Bank. Is there a particular episode that either you're especially proud of or that you found particularly challenging? And it doesn't have to necessarily be an episode that you found that you drew on your experience from U Chicago and that helped you through it, but just to help our listeners kind of understand what did the work entail, and what are the kind of the challenges with doing projects for the World Bank through the IFC.
No, totally. First of all, the World Bank gave me the opportunity to work in countries that I would never dream of working. I have worked in places like El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Haiti, so Bolivia, and so in that sense was places that was incredible experience to go on the ground and do some work, especially because are difficult places to work, to lend money, to do finance projects, and it's funny because the World Bank is a combination of technical skills for sure. So lots of people from finance background, economic background, statistics. So there's a lot of skills that you have to work in a bank, because in the end of the day, the bank is basically lending money. But on the other hand, you have to have this bias of economic development, and you have to understand that the goal of the World Bank still it is to go in places that the markets are not there, to push forward demonstration effect, to bring investment, to bring funding to difficult projects. At that time, we were very focused on climate change and renewables and microfinance and gender finance. So all of those things were actually was for me was great, because I was doing economic development in a bank. And just as something, before I went to the University of Chicago, my first job was as a trader. I was a trader in a bank that doesn't exist anymore, called Bank Boston. So I was basically doing two things that I loved: the finance side combined with the economic development. But it's a mission. You have to understand this kind of as a mission to bring development, to bring opportunity, and it's especially the one that I was very that was very important for me to be part of was when the Haiti in 2010, that we had a hurricane in Haiti. So we had to have mobilize funds, mobilize resources in a very short way, with a very delicate situation on the ground. And I was able to go there and see the situation. Is very sad to see when in a poor country after a earthquake. It's a very sad situation in many aspects, but for me it was important to be part of the solution, to be part of the recovery, and that was for me was the best job that I did do when my time in the World Bank.
With the kinds of skills and education that you have, you could have taken that either inside of government to work on policy or outside of government, and you've sort of done both. Could you talk a little bit about, the ways that people can influence policy, can help people both inside and outside of government, and how you have navigated where you want to situate yourself?
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the good things the skills that I developed, as you mentioned, was the ability to work inside the government. And kind of World Bank is kind of a government entity, because it's owned by many governments, and requires this technical skills and the experience from people from everywhere. I think one of the most important assets of the institution is that brings people together from different backgrounds, different countries, and also bring that perspective to the daily business. But again, the tools and the work that I developed in my academic career, you could also research, you could also do good work in a civil society, you could also do work in academia related to policy, related to government. And today, when I began my career, the options were, today we have much more options to work outside the government, with government related topics, with government related issues. So the only thing that I can share is that if you want to work on that, there is much more options. Of course, you have to be an expert on something, you have to specialize in a subject at all, but there's much more options to work outside the government with government related issues. I see here in DC that goes beyond lobby, beyond there's lots of think tanks, lots of people that contribute to the policy itself. So I see that this market expanded since I began my career.
Building on that and building on kind of ways that you've been able to have influence, but also the ways in which you've started to analyze policy, so forth. I'd love it if you started to go back into that time when you're in DC. You said it was during the Obama administration. You started seeing the different ways in which there was data being used on the political side. And that was something that you started to want to explore, move more into, which obviously going back to what we said at the beginning, you have now done. But do you want to talk a little bit about that process of how you came to realize the use of data to maybe understand elections, policy, so forth, and then how that led into some of the current business endeavors you have?
No, totally. Actually, I saw a guy at the Obama data team talking at the university, and I was impressed by the process itself. So I did volunteer myself to be on the ground collecting data from the Obama campaign. I remember I was going door to door in Virginia to collect data, to like run a survey about the campaign, about politics in general. And then I followed the process. So I got the data on the ground, on the street, and then they have like a place that they, like a central data system that collects, that like was centralizing information and data gathering from many sources. And then they were running models, and that was the part that impressed me, that they could give like for each household, each place, a probability to vote for Obama. So they have like a map, and it was the first time that I saw that. It was incredible. They had like a map, a neighborhood in Virginia. So that house, the probability is 60%. That house 75. That house is 90. That house is 15. So based on that probability, they were basically sending people with a higher probability to vote, to make sure that people like were voting, were getting out to vote. And then I was impressed by that process, and I knew, because I always loved politics, so I always followed elections in my country, and I knew they didn't have this technology in Latin America. They didn't have, so I was kind of impressed. So how they were using data to do micro targeting in a very, and this was 2008, and even for 2008 that was kind of advanced. But I was impressed. So that was the first time in my life, because I've never thought of being a business owner or an entrepreneur before. I always thought that I'm going to be a PhD, I'm going to work for the World Bank, I'm going to be happy. That was but for the first time I saw like a business opportunity. I said, I have to bring this process, this method to other countries, because this is something that makes political campaigns, political communication much more professional. So that was the trigger to think about opening a business. And then I remember I got a leave without pay from the World Bank, and I went to work for a political campaign in Rio, a mayor campaign. And I basically brought the method, the structure from the Obama campaign to this mayor campaign in Rio. And I don't know, Rio has 10 million voters, and we won the election by 50,000 votes. So it was a very close election. And I remember that I kind of I said, oh, this actually works. So it was my first. And then when I went back to the bank, I said, no, I need to open a business and work that, because first of all, I love working with data. That has been my career, but I love politics and I love social science. So, and I don't know if you guys working in a political campaign, but political campaign combines everything. Combines the data side, the political side, the social part, the competition part. I always be a competitor, so it's kind of so the first time that I worked in the election in Rio, I said, oh, I want that for me. So that was a game changer in my career, actually in my life. So I spent 1.5 years like basically preparing myself to leave the bank. So when I got my first client, I left the bank, and that was 2011. And for 11 years, and I did lots of political campaigns. Before coming here, I was trying to get the right number. I worked in 12 countries, working political campaigns, national elections in 12 countries, basically doing polling, doing data analysis, helping micro-targeting. And I loved so much, because each political campaign is a story, it's a different thing. So it's lots of learning.
Do you find that the same kinds of processes work well in different countries? Are there things that are very different from one region to another? I imagine that how you model might be the same, but the type of outreach to a voter may or may not be the same.
No, totally. Each country has their own dynamic, but what I try to do is always try to adapt. One of the ways that I was successful was that the ability to adapt the techniques from US to other countries, because usually the US consultants that work outside the US, they try to basically bring their expertise. And I come from Brazil, so I was able to adapting. I did a lot of work in Mexico. I did a lot of work, of course, in Brazil, but I also worked in places like South Africa, India. And one of the different things that I did was actually to adapt the data techniques, data analysis, from the what we had on the ground, from the constraints that we have working with places that most of information is not there. Sometimes there's local laws that don't allow you to get information of voters. Sometimes only the people that are in government, they have the information. So I had many different experiences, but for example, I worked in places that were very hard to work. Like I did an election in Venezuela, national election. I was working from the opposition, so we had no information at all because all the information was basically from the government, and the government was running their own thing. So it's the ability to adapt. And the good thing about the U.S. politics and elections in America, that because in America there's elections all the time, there's always new ideas, there's always new techniques. Most of the countries, they have election or 4 in 4 years or every couple years, but the good thing about America in that sense is there's always technology, there is always new things going on. Last year, for example, was the year of the artificial intelligence everywhere. So, and I always try to bring to my clients, to bring to the races, the new technology, but of course adapting to the local realities.
One of the things I find fascinating about what you're sharing is how a lot of the techniques, but also philosophical approaches that you had working for the World Bank, going into microfinance, talking to communities in Chicago, trying to understand why they're sending money back home, that kind of micro level exploration is exactly the same thing that you then started to apply to elections. And in that way, it's fascinating from a methodological standpoint. But I wonder if you could also speak to, and this is what I mean by the philosophical side, is one of the very poignant things you said about working for the World Bank was it's not, yes, it's a bank and you have to have technical skills and you have to have certain knowledge, but it's also about a buy-in with the mission of the bank and so forth. And I wonder the extent to which that similar idea also informed about why you moved into the political polling and the interest you had in going around bringing these techniques into a variety of countries, as you said, that weren't previously using those techniques.
No, totally. And some people don't understand why sometimes I left the bank and the very stable job to become a business owner. And sometimes I miss the payday because it was much easier in that sense, but I don't regret it like any second, because one of the things that I learned working microfinance, work on the bank on the ground, is that we have to be good listeners on the ground to make good policy. You cannot disconnect with the reality on the ground, and I'm kind of a privileged guy. I went to college, I went to study abroad, I did everything. And then sometimes that gives you a distance of the reality that's not good for anything. So one of my passions is to go on the ground, to be close to people, to develop mechanisms to listen to voters, to citizens. And I learned a lot, and I try to. And one of the things that is very important about collecting data, doing surveys, running polling, you have to leave your bias at home. And I know we live in a very polarized situation right now everywhere, but so my passion was always and I didn't do it. I didn't change jobs because of the money. I did because I thought I would be working in political survey, polling, working on those elections. I would put myself in positions to learn much more about people, about different situations. So I always tell that I run a lot of, I participate in lots of political campaigns in the Americas, from Canada to Argentina. And I remember the first time I went to work in a political campaign in Europe, I did a lot of work in Portugal and Spain. But I went to Portugal. It was my first experience in Europe running a political campaign. And I was shocked when I saw something very different, because in America, that's not what's happening right now, but it used to be. In America, United States or Brazil or Mexico, people used to have the feeling that the future would be always better than the past. It's not, that's what's going on right now, but it used to be that people basically go to a political campaign to sell dreams, to sell that everything's going to be better. But in Europe, it's completely the other way around. People are completely sure that the future is going to be worse than the past. So when I came to Portugal and Spain, I realized, oh, this is a completely different mindset of communication, of social engagement, and everything. So and that was my passion, to be on the ground, to be learning about new things. So and it's tough because being an entrepreneur is very tough. I always tell that if you want to open your business, to run a business, it's very tough. It's those for many issues. And I was not trained to be a business owner. I was not. I've never had like management, leadership training or whatever. But on the other hand, gives you the opportunity to run your own ideas, to test your own things, and I put myself in the position. So I want to do a business that I always will be learning, and that was the driver for me.
What sorts of advice would you give to people who are thinking now about, like someday I might want to do this kind of thing. I might want to work in political polling, or I might want to work in data and ideas. What's your advice to them?
Oh my God, this is one of the things that I should mention, that why I moved to open the fund after like 7-8 years working political campaigns. Something become very harder because most of the countries, including the US, become so polarized. And if I was working from one side, the other side would see me as an enemy, basically. And that's terrible, especially for professionals. That you basically many places I work for the left, for the right, for the center, but right now it's impossible because of the polarized fashion. So first of all, you have to know how to navigate polarized institutions, polarized countries, polarized parties. Is not easy. It's not easy, and this is, you have to be aware, because that makes everything much harder. And then I realized that I got lots of demand from financial institutions to understand elections, to understand polling. So I was doing lots of political campaigns, and I moved to basically working for financial institutions. And then I learned how they were basically making money trading on elections. So that was my motivation to open the fund. So first of all, you have to navigate the polarized fashion, and you have to of course, especially in polling, you have to be very open to new methodologies, because the methodology that worked yesterday doesn't work today, and people are evolving. For example, in 2014, I had the sense that everything would be going through the cell phone, because we need to be inside the cell phone to understand the behavior. But right now, everything will be running from the artificial intelligence. So it's a different ballpark right now. It's a different. For example, today we do a lot of hybrid methodologies to collect data, especially in polling. That was something that was unimaginable a few years ago. So your capacity to adapt is critical to the situation that we are living right now. And also, on top of that, is the most difficult part. You have to control your own bias, because we talk to our family, we talk to our friends, we talk to our colleagues, and that put us in a bubble. So, and that bubble is that generates the polarized situation that we are living right now. So we don't understand the other side. We don't talk to the other side. We're basically surrounded by the arguments that we already agree upon. So if you want to work in data combined with politics, you have to be able to exercise your bias and leave your bias at home. And this is not an easy exercise, because you have to practice basically on a daily basis.
And I know that our listeners can't see the video that we're looking at right now, but just to underscore the fact that you try to not have the bias, I noticed that over your shoulder there is both an elephant and a donkey. So thereby very symbolically emphasizing how you're trying not to have a bias one way or the other, but just to actually understand what's happening with elections.
Yeah, no, I always tell my students that I was from the time that it was possible to work for Republicans and Democrats. Right now, it's impossible to do it.
So at this point, we always like to ask our guests, is there something that we should have asked? Something that you would hope that you would have had a chance to share with us that we haven't asked you about. There's been so much, you've taken us in so many directions. It's been a really fascinating conversation, but is there anything that we should have asked you?
No, one thing that I always like to say about polling, because every place I go and people say, oh, the pollings are always wrong and etc. And it's funny because that sense was the opportunity that I saw to open the fund. So let me just summarize what I do in the fund. I always try to develop like a probability curve of the outcome of the election, and I try to see if the markets are pricing the same probability curve. So basically, if the markets are seeing the same outcome that I'm seeing, there is no trade because there is no what we call asymmetry. But when I'm seeing a different outcome from the markets, that's trade. And one of the things that I was so shocked about is that people take political polling as a prediction, and political polling is basically a picture of the moment. And at that moment, with that, there's undecided voters. There's people that maybe are not going to show up to vote. So there's a lots of things in a picture. And I was impressed that even the players of the financial markets, they also see political polling as any kind of prediction of the future, and it's not. And from one side, this was I realized that was, oh my God, why we're not communicating that polling is not a prediction model. But on the other side, I saw that as an opportunity because I saw lots of players taking the polls as something that will predict the future, and that generates the asymmetry that opens the chance for me to run a fund that trades on that. So, and this is a message that it's very important to have polling all the time, but it's very hard to see even the press, the political press in America and everywhere, taking that the polling are wrong or right because they're not there to predict the future. They're basically showing a picture of the moment. So that's something that I always try to see, and that gave me the opportunity to trade on that.
If our listeners would like to follow along with what you're doing, what you're up to, are you on social media or anywhere that they can follow you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not a social media guy, but I'm LinkedIn. So just put my name and my last name. I'm there, and I would love to interact there with the listeners.
With that, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, I know our listeners are going to enjoy hearing this conversation. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Paul, was a pleasure to talk to University of Chicago. They have like a special place in my heart.